Hello, Iris. Welcome to your practice interview question. My name is Hailey Perez, and we'll have about 5 questions to go through, and you will be answering them. Can you give me some information about you, your name, and your goals, anything?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Aris Aquino. I am finishing my bachelor's degree in early childhood education. I've been in this early childhood world for 24 years now, and I am currently the center director for New Pathways Early Childhood Center.
Okay, thank you for your information, Iris. We're gonna start with the first question. Take the time that you need. What drew your what drew you to the early childhood profession?
I was drawn to the early childhood profession through a combination of personal experience, deep conviction, and a recognition early in my life that the foundational years of a childhood are unlike any other period in human development. Growing up in a bilingual household, I experienced firsthand how language shapes a child's sense of identity, belonging, and self worth. I watched younger siblings and cousins navigate two worlds, English at school and Spanish at home. And I witnessed both the richness of that dual identity and the very real challenges that emerged when it was not honored or understood by the adults around them. That experience planted a seed on me. I want to be the kind of educator who welcomes every child's full linguistic and cultural self into the learning environment without asking them to leave any part of who they are at the door. When I formally entered the field of early childhood education, I discovered that my personal convictions were not only affirmed by research, they were actually at the center of what the profession stands for. The early childhood years, from birth through age 8, are when the brain forms at its most rapid and most consequential rate. It is during these years that attachment relationships are established, that language acquisition takes root, that executive function begins to develop, and that children form their earliest understandings of themselves as learners. I read the work of researchers like Jack Shonkoff and Patricia Cole and recognized immediately that working in this field meant participating in something profoundly important, something that ripples outward into every dimension of a person's life. Over the course of my career, my initial calling has only deepened and become more specific. As I transitioned into leadership and became the director of New Pathways Early Childhood Center, a bilingual English Spanish program here in Missouri, I came to understand that my role extends far beyond the classroom. I'm not only responsible for the children in our care, I am responsible for creating the conditions under which great teaching can happen, building systems that honor families as partners, and advocating for a profession that deserves far greater recognition and investment than it currently receives. Every morning when I walk through the doors of New Pathways, I am reminded of why I started, because what we do in the earliest years matters enormously. And the children and families we serve deserve educators who show up with their whole hearts.
Thank you, Iris, for your response. Now let's go to question number 2. What do you consider to be your shift responsibility of responsibilities as an early childhood personnel?
As an early childhood professional serving in the role of program director, my chief responsibilities fall into three interconnected areas: ensuring the safety, well being, and developmental support of every child in our programs, building genuine reciprocal partnerships with families, and leading and developing a team of educators who are reflective, knowledgeable, and committed to continuous growth. Each of these responsibilities is essential on its own, and yet they are also deeply interdependent. When one is strong, it reinforces the others, and when one is neglected, the whole program feels it. At the foundation of everything I do is child safety and well being. No meaningful learning can occur in an environment where a child does not feel physically safe and emotional secure. At New Pathways, I work diligently to ensure that our environment not only meets Missouri licensing standards, but goes beyond compliance to create a genuinely nurturing, trauma informed community. This means maintaining low child to staff ratios, prioritizing attachment supported relationships in every room, designing environments that are predictable and sensory responsive, and ensuring that our practices are grounded in what we know about how young children develop and learn. When I think about NACI Standard 1, promoting child development and learning, I see that standard alive in the daily decisions we make about time, space, materials, and relationships at New Pathways. Equally important to me is my responsibility to the families of the children we serve. The NACI professional framework makes clear that families are children's first and most enduring educators. And I take that principle seriously as both a philosophical commitment and a practical mandate. At New Pathways, family engagement is not a program add on, it is woven into our culture. We communicate in both English and Spanish. We host bilingual family advisory council meetings. We share documentation of children's learning in ways that invite families into the conversation. And we ask families to help shape our curriculum priorities. My responsibility is to ensure that every family who walks through our doors feels genuinely welcome, respected, and recognized as a partner. Finally, as a director and instructional leader, I hold a deep responsibility for the professional growth of my teaching team. I believe that a program can only be as strong as the educators within it, and that investing in staff development is one of the most direct ways I can impact children's outcomes. I provide reflective supervision, facilitate collaborative planning, model a commitment to lifelong learning through my own ongoing coursework at Walden University, and create structures that allow my teachers to learn from one another. Building that kind of professional learning culture is, I believe, one of the most meaningful contributions I can make to the children and families we serve.
Thank you, Iris, for that response. Let's go to question number three. What is the role of collaboration in professional practice? Address collaboration with other professionals as well as families.
Collaboration is not, in my view, a supplementary element of professional practice in early childhood education. It is the very infrastructure upon which quality practice is built. Whether I am working with the families we serve, the staff I lead, the community partners we engage, or the specialists who support children with diverse needs, collaboration is how the most important work actually gets done. I have come to believe that no single professional, no matter how skilled or experienced, can serve young children as effectively in isolation as a well-functioning team can. And that team must always include families as its center. When it comes to collaboration with families, my guiding principle is genuine partnership rather than one directional information thing. There is an important distinction between telling families what we are doing and actually inviting families into decision making alongside us. At New Pathways, we have worked hard to build this second kind of relationship. Our monthly family advisory council meetings give families a real voice in program decisions, from curriculum priorities to scheduling to how we celebrate cultural events throughout the year. We communicate in both English and Spanish so that language is never a barrier to participation. We ask families to share what they know about their children's strengths, interests, home routines, and cultural practices. And we use that information to make our classrooms more responsive and affirming. This approach is grounded in research on family engagement, which constantly shows that children thrive when their families are genuine partners in their education, not just recipients of newsletters. Collaboration with other professionals is equally central to my practice. At New Pathways, we work closely with a range of specialists: speech language pathologists, early intervention consultants, school psychologists, and special education coordinators to support children with diverse developmental needs. When a child is referred for evaluation or receives support services, I facilitate a team based process that brings together the family, the child's classroom teacher, and all relevant specialists so that everyone is working from a shared understanding of the child and a unified plan of support. I have found that these interprofessional collaborations consistently produce better outcomes than any one of us could achieve alone because each team member brings a distinct lens and a unique relationship with the child. I also collaborate with peer professionals in the broader early childhood community. I participate in a regional directors network where colleagues and I discuss shared challenges and emerging research. And I maintain connections with local Head Start programs in the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's Early Childhood Office. These professional relationships keep me current, connected, and accountable. And they remind me that the work of improving outcomes for young children is always a collective effort, never a solo alone.
Wow, that was amazing, Iris. Um, let's go to question number 4. What strategies do you routinely utilize to ensure that you are critically reflecting on your own growth as an EC professional?
Critical reflection is something I practice both as a personal discipline and as a structural feature of how I lead at New Pathways Early Childhood Center. I have come to believe that a professional who is not actively reflecting is a professional who is not genuinely growing. And in a field as dynamic, evidence based, and consequential as early childhood education, complacency is simple, not an option. The children and families we serve deserve educators and leaders who continuously examine their assumptions, interrogate their practices, and remain open to learning and change. One of my most consistent and sustaining reflection strategies is professional journaling. I keep a dedicated journal in which I record observations from classrooms, visits, notes from conversations with families or staff members that gave me pause, questions that emerged from professional readings, and decisions I made during the week that I want to revisit with fresh eyes. Writing slows me down and forces me to name what I actually think, not just what I feel in the moment. And receiving past entries over time helps me identify patterns in my thinking and track my own evolution as a leader. I am often surprised by what I find when I read journal entries from 6 months or a year earlier. The distance reveals growth I did not notice as it was happening. I also engage in structured peer consultation through a monthly early childhood directors network. These conversations are invaluable because they expose me to perspectives and approaches I would not generate on my own. My colleagues ask me questions that survey assumptions I did not know I was holding, and I do the same for them. This kind of collegial accountability is something I genuinely value. It is both intellectually stimulating and professionally grounding. Additionally, I pursued formal ongoing education through my enrollment in Walden's University Bachelor of Science in Early Childhood Studies. Being a practitioner who is simultaneously a student requires me to constantly bridge theory and practice, to ask how what I'm learning applies to new pathways, to the families we serve, to the challenges my teachers face in real classroom with real children. That integration is itself a powerful reflective practice. Finally, I conduct regular reflective classroom observations at new pathways, not to evaluate compliance, but to observe with curiosity, ask questions about what I see, and bring these observations into coaching conversations with my staff. Building a culture of reflection across my entire program begins with modeling it from the director's chair every single day.
Thank you for that answer, Iris. Now, let's go to the final question. Briefly describe an issue that might be the focus of current or future advocacy efforts and explain why advocacy is a hallmark of professionalism in the early childhood field.
An issue that sits at the very center of my advocacy work is one that I believe demands sustained collective action from the early childhood profession at both local and national levels. It's equitable access to high quality bilingual early childhood education for children from Spanish speaking homes in Missouri and across the country. The research on dual language development is robust and compelling. Children who develop literacy and language competency in two languages demonstrate cognitive flexibility, stronger executive function, and long term academic advantages compared to the monolingual peers. And yet, despite the evidence, access to high quality, research aligned bilingual programs remains deeply and persistently unequal. Families with financial resources and geographic access can choose programs like New Pathways. The many families without those advantages often cannot. That inequity is not simply a programmatic gap, it is a justice issue, and it's one our profession has a responsibility to name and address. I had advocated for this cause in several concrete ways. I have participated in state level conversations about early childhood funding equity, shared data and program outcomes from New Pathway with local policymakers, and spoken at community forums about the evidence base for dual language programming and the urgent need for increased public investment. I am currently building connections with NACE's affiliate network in Missouri to explore opportunities to contribute to policy briefs and legislative testimony on dual language program funding and workforce development. Looking ahead, I intend to expand this advocacy by supporting our families in becoming advocates for themselves. Because when the families most directly affected by this inequity speak to policymakers in their own voices, the impact is unmeasurable. Advocacy is a hallmark of professionalism in the early childhood field for several interconnected reasons. First, our youngest children, infant, toddlers, and preschoolers cannot advocate for themselves. They have no voice in policy decisions, no representation in budget negotiations, and no power to demand the resources they need and deserve. It falls to us, as the professionals who work most closely with them and know their needs more intimately, to be that voice. Second, our field has historically been undervalued, underfunded, and misunderstood in the broader public discourse. Early childhood educators are among the most educated professionals in the workforce and among the least compensated, a contradiction that advocacy must work to correct. And third, and perhaps most fundamentally, advocacy is inseparable from our ethical obligations as early childhood professionals. NACE's Code of Ethical Conduct calls on us not only to serve the children and families in our immediate care, but to work on behalf of all the children and families, to use our knowledge and our platform to advance policies and practices that promote the well being and dignity of every child. When we stay silent in the face of inequity, we're not being neutral. We're choosing the status quo. And the status quo is not acceptable for the children and families who depend on us most.